All right, everyone, let's get going. Thank you for joining me. Welcome to episode 47 of This Week is Live. I'm your host, Raymond Flotat from mxdwn.com. That's Mixdown. Thanks for joining us. So glad to see you well. A whole bunch of stuff going on, a lot of ground to cover, and we're going to try to blaze right through today. Lots of stuff to talk about. So first and foremost, Hulu, one of many streaming services that's out there in the world. Hulu was begun in 2007 as a joint venture between Fox, which is basically News Corp as a parent company, if you're not familiar, and NBC Universal, and which was originally started to be like a home for streaming episodes of recent television and has grown to its own kind of provider along Disney Plus and Netflix and Max, and which used to be HBO Max, and all the different platforms that are out there, has basically been kind of passed around like a hot potato. Different companies have owned this or owned stakes in it over time. And right now, the news that's happened is that Disney has officially purchased whatever they didn't already own of it. Now, when Disney purchased Fox a couple of years back, which was a massive thing that had a lot to do with the intellectual property of things like the rest of the Marvel Studios movies and also Fox movies, pictures like Avatar and stuff like that, ultimately, they, through that, ended up with a majority stake in Hulu. 33% of Hulu was still owned by Comcast. And those of you that don't live in sections of the country that have it, Comcast is one of the major cable providers in America. So it's a massive, massive company. Well, they own 33%, and Disney is buying the remaining 33% of Hulu for $8.6 billion. So now they're going to completely control that streaming platform. They've already been integrating that a lot in their service offerings as ways of incentivizing people to sign up for Disney Plus, but now they're going to completely control both. Now, if you ask me as a pundit, what does that mean? I'm not sure how much sense it makes to have numerous streaming platforms under the same company. I would expect them to be folded together, but that's not an announcement they've made. That's just me speculating at this point. But why would you have numerous different platforms? Now, maybe they want to have their fingers in other broadcast network shows that do stream on Hulu. Well, that remains to be seen. Elsewhere in sad news, probably most pertinently relevant to the realm of television, famed actor Matthew Perry had passed away. Most of you know Matthew Perry from his time on the acclaimed NBC show Friends, which at its time, along with Seinfeld and kind of coming right on the end of Seinfeld, was far and away basically, one of the most popular television shows ever. And at that time, far and away the most popular television show that there was. Now, Matthew Perry passed away on Saturday, right in the run-up to Halloween weekend, and there's not a lot of information as to his exact cause of death, other than that it was known that he was found in his hot tub. He had already been deceased at the point that he was found. Apparently, he had been playing pickleball at a country club earlier that day with friends, came home, sent his assistant away, and then when he was found not that long later, he was already, unfortunately, passed away. There is a toxicology report that's going to be worked on, and that takes usually several months to figure out, and that's being done by the LA County Coroner's Office. So right now, there's no exact cause of death. There's no foul play expected. There's apparently, according to reports that have come out in the last few days since he passed away, nothing that very specifically, points to any kind of drug paraphernalia or anything around it. Who knows what the health reason is that he passed away, but it's super unfortunate. It's sad, especially for fans of him and that show. For those of you that didn't know, in the aftermath of Friends being such a massive success, like many of the other cast members like David Schwimmer and, Courtney Cox, he started appearing in a lot of movies. Some of them were decent, some of them weren't super successful, and he's just kind of been around ever since, doing various things. Was a part of the Friends reunion that happened the other year on HBO, and unfortunately just way too young. Matthew Perry had long spoken openly about his struggles with addiction and trying to beat those struggles with addiction. Of course, we're not bringing that up to conflate what's happened or to assume or ascribe that to the events that are being reported here. Only that to say that that was a long part of his story, that he would long an advocate for people trying to be clean and trying to help in terms of that, and to share his story in hopes that it'd help other people. In the world of video games, some more bad news. Bungie. Now, this might take a little bit of description for those of you that aren't super used to following game circles. Bungie is a company that's long made very successful video games. Now, they go back all the way to the 90s, and they were a part of a series of early first-person shooters, kind of in the same era of Dune, that were known as Marathon. Marathon was a big part of their intellectual property, usually made just for Mac computers at that time, and what happened was, in the late 90s, Bungie was acquired by Microsoft, and they made a little video game called Halo, which, for most of you that were even half paying attention during the mid to early 2000s, was the most successful video game ever at that time. And that was they were a stable within Microsoft's whole Xbox wing of original first-party content. Somewhere along the line, for some reason, Microsoft thought it was a good idea to spin them off into their own limited liability partnership, and they kind of went solo, and then very famously started making another game called Destiny, which was also really successful, a different kind of first-person shooter, another space-oriented one, a little bit in the vein of Halo, but certainly not Halo. I don't want to conflate things in that respect. And then somewhere along the line, as you're seeing what we mentioned in the story with Hulu being fully acquired by Disney, when you get to this level of corporate infrastructure, companies kind of get passed around, shuffled around, purchased, shifted, and moved. And somewhere along the line, Sony ended up purchasing Bungie and their assets. Well, keeping with the bad news that's been happening in the realm of video games all year, Bungie's announced a series of layoffs, and it looks like the series of layoffs is about 100 people, which is roughly 8% of their workforce. Now, indications had been that when Sony had acquired them, that the staff was being told, and of course this is according to IGN and other sources, that there would be no layoffs as a part of this acquisition. Some reporters and some sources coming out of IGN have it that this wasn't a decision made by Sony, that this was a decision ultimately made by Bungie and their own management. Apparently, there was that when they released Destiny 2, their performance was far beneath what was hoped for, maybe even to the tune of 45% below what was projected for sales and revenue, and that is furthering Bungie's management in terms of, at least reportedly, why they are thinking it's necessary to conduct layoffs here. And it is affecting many different departments, including community team, art engineering, recruiting, legal, audio, QA, creative studios, and IT. So unfortunately for all those folks, no longer a position for them at that company. Super sad to hear that about any company, any person, any job. One day you're working some shuffling of the deck at a level that you don't really have control over, and you don't have a job anymore. Terrible and sad. There's some concern, and now we can't really confirm any of this for you at this point, but as far as the reporting that's out there, there's some concern that there are some folks that had unvested shares in the company and that they might lose them. Now, when we have more information on this, we'll bring you a solid answer as to this and whether that's the case. When you ultimately work at a company where one of the things they offer as an incentive is shares in the company, a lot of the time what they do is they give you what are called options. Options are there as something you could take advantage of if you want to buy into the company, but as a perk for trying to keep you in the job, so you don't just come into the company, get your shares, quit, and then make a ton of money later. You have to get them at a certain percentage, usually like over 4 years, 25% a year. It's different for every single company. But then what happens is, at the end of that time, if you want to activate those options, hence why they're called options, you have to purchase them. So you buy them at a really cheap, fair price, and then you own a stake in the company. And if something ever happens, if they're acquired, you benefit the way anyone would if they owned a percentage of something that's sold. So there's some concern to people that the terms of use there might have it be that since they technically didn't make to the end of their vesting period, if they were laid off, maybe they aren't able to activate on those options. We'll bring you more reporting on that as we have it, if we have confirmation there. Now, this is something we've obviously been reporting on a lot, and I know you're itching, chomping at the bit to hear more news about strike negotiations. I know you were waiting for it. Well, here we are. And as we were talking for many months there about the WGA, the Writers Guild of America strike, and ultimately then there was the dual strike where there was the writer's strike and then the SAG-AFTRA strike, which was, of course, the actors and the performance artists and everyone that's the, on-screen talent. We had two strikes running at once. The big sticking issue being artificial intelligence, along with pay raises to match inflation and other things like that. Well, the WGA strike has been settled, and then the strike between SAG-AFTRA, the Screen Actors Guild of American Federation of Television and Radio Artists, which is on the other side, the controlling arm of who actually makes television and movies, which is the AMPTP, the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers. That's the group, the consortium that's representing the networks, the production companies. Their negotiations have been in various states of disrepair, sometimes doing pretty well, sometimes not doing very well. And the interesting thing, what's of note right now, is there's finally some headway in terms of negotiations. There was a point where everybody just walked away from the table and everyone was still striking, no end in sight as far as what was going to happen with the strike. And now there's apparently some progress. SAG-AFTRA had the following to say just yesterday. The negotiating committee met today to discuss and finalize our response to the AMPTP AI counterproposal, which we received yesterday. The negotiators then met with AMPTP representatives for more than 3 hours this afternoon and evening to present and review our revised proposal. We continue to await AMPTP's response to our comprehensive counterproposal package, which we gave them on Saturday, addressing outstanding issues. Please know that your presence on the picket lines and support on social media remain a source of inspiration. In solidarity and gratitude, your TV Theatrical Negotiating Committee. So maybe we finally got some progress. Maybe they're starting to see some way, because when it comes to something like this, nobody really wins. You have something like this and it's come to a point where there's a full-on strike and a whole industry has been just totally shut down. One side's going to have to come away from what they want. The other side's going to have to come. They're going to have to meet in the middle somewhere. So fingers crossed, because it's obviously good for everyone. People need work. People like entertainment. I'm not trying to advocate for one side or the other, and nor would we here in this. But ultimately, if everyone can find terms that are amenable, that's a good thing for all. So here's to hoping that we might be near the end of it. We'll see. We'll bring you more on that as it happens. Of course, if there is a resolution, a 5-month backlog of stuff that's been just ground to a halt, we'll finally have a chance to move forward in terms of creation of content, television, movies, also the promotion of those movies. There's things like The Marvels that's about to come out in a couple weeks, and nobody from the movie can promote it because of the SAG-AFTRA strike. Elsewhere in the world of movies, just as an interesting kind of side note, and there's a little bit of a, corollary overlap in terms of video game coverage, Five Nights at Freddy's, the new horror movie that has just been released, dethroned Taylor Swift's Eras Tour kind of concert biopic, self documentary, finally from the head of the box office. We talked to you last week about how Killers of the Flower Moon, Martin Scorsese's movie, what came in second. Of course, it's a 3.5-hour movie. Maybe not everybody wants to sit for a 3.5-hour movie in the theaters nowadays, or ever did. I don't know. Titanic might be a notable exception to way back when that was a massive success. But Five Nights at Freddy's has surpassed Taylor Swift's Eras Tour at the box office, doing a surprising $78 million at the box office. Now, with that, this is interesting because Five Nights at Freddy's is a long, successful video game franchise. There's lots of different versions of it. There's different play styles. There's not one just version of the game, but it was always kind of a creepy horror-esque game. You're set in this kind of abandoned amusement park, something a la Chuck E. Cheese if you grew up in the 80s, and these villainous, very scary kind of animatronic bears are kind of hiding, chasing you. You have to try to not get killed by them. Very, very creepy video game for what it's worth as far as a horror video game is concerned. So this is an adaptation of that, which, video game movies don't usually work, aren't often very interesting or fun, and apparently successful. But that's also, I can tell you, just being in our shoes, we've known that there's been a lot of interest in this because the franchise is so popular. Kind of like how Taylor Swift has such a built-in fan base behind her tour, her music. When it came time for there to be a movie, it was kind of a duh. Of course, there's going to be a lot of tickets sold for that. Well, Five Nights at Freddy's is a similar thing. The video game world has long had a kind of silent majority that a lot of video game press doesn't like to talk about, and that is mobile games. For whatever reason, most gamers have an attitude and a big head about console gaming or PC gaming or elaborate graphics, and most people that play games play it on a phone. Most people play video games on a phone if they are going to play video games. So it is a kind of an unspoken thing that people kind of treat mobile games like they're not as important as console games, the big AAA titles, or PC gaming. But really, there's a giant audience of people who like that content. Lastly, since we mentioned Taylor Swift, and once again, I know you're chomping at the bit for Taylor Swift news here in this show, but apparently Taylor Swift is one of the few artists in music in history to cross over into the Billionaires Club. That's right. According to Bloomberg and CNN, apparently their estimates of Taylor Swift's net worth, coming largely on the heels of the juggernaut sold-out 50-date stadium tour, Eras Tour, and then, of course, now the film release, largely financed by her, reportedly between 10 to 20 million, and then now grossing over $100 million at the box office. All of these things combined, plus, of course, her long career that she's been very successful almost throughout all of it, She is now over $1 billion in net worth, according to Bloomberg. This is, of course, Taylor Swift's not herself saying, I'm a billionaire or I'm rich. But ultimately, within this, this is interesting and kind of significant in a small respect because there hasn't been many times where someone in music has gotten to that level of wealth without having been because of other investments they made. Jay-Z and Rihanna have both been indicated to be over the billionaire mark in terms of their total net worth, and something to some extent Jay-Z along with Beyonce, his wife. But that comes on the heels of investments in other companies and other products and other businesses. Rihanna has clothing and makeup lines. Jay-Z's had companies, clubs, was an investor in the New York Nets for a time. And that was a big part of helping propel them into that other level of success. So, wow, Taylor Swift dominating basically everything in 2023. And then to wrap up today, I wanted to tell a little story kind of going in a different direction. We talked about a lot of different things, interesting challenges in the world, interesting challenges in society. And I wanted to go into kind of a different topic because it's a pretty fraught time right now. And a lot of what you see out there has to do with growing frustration, right? Like things that maybe have been long wrong, long not dealt with or dealt with correctly, and somewhat spinning out of control, perhaps in other ways, and people's just lack of patience coming off of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. Inflation, harder to make a living, harder to do everything, seemingly in America right now, and that is anger. So I want to talk a little bit about anger right now. Now, when I was young, Rage Against the Machine was kind of in their infancy, really kind of exciting thing. Rage Against the Machine was kind of like a bomb going off in terms of music. Rap and heavy metal were still kind of newer as far as most people's public consciousness was concerned. Metallica hadn't become like a household name at this point. And, you know, heavy music hybridized with hip hop, rhymes, rapping, especially social consciousness and activism was a totally unusual thing. So at that age, as a young guitar player and a young music fan who's just craving, you know, craving much more different content, something unusual, something different, hearing their first real single, which was Freedom. MTV started playing Freedom at late night and then eventually in the afternoon. This was the biggest breath of fresh air you can imagine. Now, Freedom has a long story behind it. You should kind of dig into it. I'm not going to go into all of that here, but it has a lot to do with the activist, the long incarcerated Leonard Peltier, and the story about what happened, why he was incarcerated, whether he should have ever been or not. There's a long rabbit hole to go down there. We'll let you do that on your own time. But Zach De La Rocha, as lead singer of Rage Against the Machine, painting a picture of certain social injustices and things going on there. This song basically ends with him screaming at the top of his lungs, just freedom, over and over again. It's blood curdling, and it's designed to be, and there was nothing like it at the time. They are world famous behind kind of what they were able to accomplish, never mind the wizardry of guitar playing of Tom Morello. Now, one of the things that I always remember about this song, and it certainly rubbed a lot of people the wrong way even then, which was there's a point where all these crazy riffs, all these crazy sounds, there's even actually like trash can percussion by Stephen Perkins from Jane's Addiction on that song. At some point, everything kind of breaks down, and you hear Zach De La Rocha kind of whisper into the mic, "Anger is a gift." And at that point, everything just goes nuts. They're screaming, the riffs come back in. And those words have long kind of emanated in my head. Now, over the years, I've thought different things of that sentiment, right? Like now I think in Rage Against the Machine and Zach De La Rocha's book, looking at what this is and thinking about what they're up against, the things that they're fighting for, the injustices they're fighting against. They're looking at anger as a propellant force, right? A way to push people into action. Oh, you feel bad about what's happening? Use that to do something positive. That's my interpretation of what's in there. But then anger is an easy thing. As you get into adulthood and you get to a different age bracket, when you have a lot of notion of consequences and different things that can happen and go wrong, and how choices stick with you kind of forever. Tiny moments of things, of mistakes. Years later, you're like, oh man, if I had just taken a breath at that point, or if I had just not responded to that email at that point. These things can't get back. There's no takesies backsies when it comes to these kinds of moments. So you think about the concept of anger as a gift, and you think about the notion of, I don't know, a forthright anger. feeling an aggression and wanting to vent it forth. And of course, this world is overloaded with examples of improper use of anger and the way that misguided aggression hurts people. Not the least of which being in this country, in the United States, in North America, there is an alarming amount of shootings, both in schools and in public places, in every state and every locality. Here in Southern California, recently last week, a horrible series of shootings in Maine, which is not really regarded as a hotbed of crime. You have things in major cities in Chicago and New York, but then you also had things like what happened at a Walmart in Texas. And so many of these, including the worst mass shooting in United States history, which was at the Las Vegas Country Music Fest that's happened about 4 or 5 years ago, almost no explanation to be found behind any of it. Now, I don't think I'm going on a limb to be like, this shit has sucked for a long time. People are frustrated and people are tired, and blame anyone for that. Things have been so monstrously rough for so long, and people's tolerance, their patience for it. I talked a little bit last week about apathy, and I talked about the feeling, the pervasive notion of helplessness in the midst of this. But what we're seeing now is outright aggression. Now, there's some very complicated geopolitical things going on, most of which the kinds of stuff that we can do very little about. For over a year now, Russia's been attempting to take over Ukraine. And then now, a serious and terrible act of violence in Israel has led to a massive reprisal by the Israeli IDF and Benjamin Netanyahu, the head of Israel. And people are furious. Terrible things are happening, and it's probably going to get a lot worse before it gets any better. And within this, there is kind of a notion, I think, a pervasive sense of helplessness, right? What can we do? What can people in this moment in time do? But then there's also that outward notion of anger. So you have crimes against Muslim and Islamic citizens here in the United States. You have crimes or at least hateful propaganda aimed at Jewish citizens in the United States. So anger boiling over almost everywhere that we look. And on some level, in an atmosphere where there's too few leaders, there's too few people to unite people and to help take consensus and try to drive policy or to try to help to drive change. Not to mention the fact that, as far as the political apparatus of the United States, things are basically completely gridlocked. In a 50-50 divided two-party system, nothing's going to get done. And everybody knows that. And everybody's completely tired and frustrated by it. So it is something that I find myself thinking, whereas, yes, anger can be a gift, and anger has its moments where it can help further change, help you get motivated to try to make things be more just, less injustice. That's all a good thing in the world. But there is a very fine line between what is going to motivate you positively and what's going to cause you to act out without thinking. In terms of, just being, doesn't have to be any act of violence, just that less kind to the people around you, that less tolerant to the people around you. I mean, chances are, whatever anybody thinks, no matter how divided we all are, on some level, we're all just grappling with the same stuff. Want to be able to live comfortably, don't want to be sad, want to be able to make a decent enough living that we don't have to worry about it. And that is immensely hard. Unless you come from a well-off background, your family had money in terms of your origins, unless you're incredibly fortunate and spearheaded a company that sold for millions of dollars, it is just super, super hard. And everybody's in that bucket. People have different ideas of how to execute that and how to maintain that mission. And of course, certain edifice of bureaucracy, of media, certain cultural groups may try to drive a wedge between one person and the other. But at the end of the day, the more peaceably we can all exist, the better things can be in terms of making things better. So to me, all that I can say in this moment, because I don't blame anyone for being angry, I don't blame anyone for struggling with what's happening right now. But for me, what I can see in this moment is sometimes when you see red and the worst of things happen, you have to pull yourself back from it. There's a story that I've always told in my life, and I Didn't have a very happy upbringing, didn't have a very happy childhood, didn't like where I went to school or the kids I went to school with. And I remember there was one time we're in a well-off family and we didn't have a lot of money, and having new things was rarity. You had to make do a lot of the time. And I remember there was one year my parents bought me a coat, and I think in that stage of my life, certainly got picked on, treated terribly by most of the kids at school. Very common. That wasn't really all that unusual to me. So, you have recess. Sometimes I think in school at that point, we might even had 3 periods of recess. I don't know why they had us just sitting outside half the time, but okay, whatever. That's neither here nor there. And I remember it was just after a rainstorm in New England. You grew up in Connecticut, it rains all the time, puddles. And I don't remember quite what happened. Most of it's kind of blacked out in my brain. And, I believe that somebody started giving me a hard time. I think that I pushed back on them, too tired to continue to be just treated terribly. And I remember some kind of vehicle of conflict, and they grabbed me and ripped my jacket. And I felt very proud of it because I was very happy. My parents got me a jacket I liked. And it was like a total C-Red moment. Now, not a person who's ever been like the peak of physical fitness or a bodybuilder or anything, but I picked this person up and I body slammed them into a puddle. Whoever they were, I don't even remember to the stains of time. Anger got the better of me. And I remember at that youthful age walking away crying, tears rolling down my face. Was not happy about what I did. I did not feel a sense of conquest or ha ha ha, I got you for being such a terrible human. I remember feeling terrible that it came to that. The person, whoever they were, stood covered in mud, drenched in mud as I walked away crying. And it occurred to me, even though I rarely ever thought about such things or did things, how much easier would it have been if that had been like 1 centimeter in the wrong direction? Could have killed that person. Wasn't trying to. Just a moment of anger. Lost control. Too upset by too many things going wrong. But what damage that could have done. How bad could that have been in the face of that moment and the consequences through the rest of my life? Now, I don't remember what this terrible person said or did. I don't remember the events that led to it, but I remember how bad it felt, that it had to come to that. And maybe not everybody feels the same. Maybe there's people out there with stories about how someone wronged them and they beat the crap out of them and they feel better about it, but it didn't do it for me. And therein kind of lies my point. And those things, those moments, justified they may be, you take them with you for the rest of your life. So in this time where things couldn't possibly be more fractious, and while if anger motivates you to do good and to help things be better, awesome, more power to you. If anger is a gift and it actually helps you in that respect, great. But in almost all other cases, as unavoidable as some of these frustrations may be, then the challenge is, how can you in this moment try to find space from it? Clear your head. Be able to be away from it. Give yourself a chance in terms of just blowing off some steam. And think about those greater ramifications of consequences. Think about how even sometimes these assailants that might be frustrating you so badly, it might not be their choice. It might not be that. Now, I'm not ascribing this to the larger, obvious, terrible geopolitical, crises of the moment. But in terms of just everyday people around you, they might be doing their best. They might be misguided. They might be frustrated, or they might not have a choice. Anything that can be done to find a way peaceably to coexist is going to be better for us in the long run. That's all for episode 47 of This Week is Live. As a programming note, as we mentioned in the last few episodes, we're going to be rounding the bend here at episode 50. So that means that we have 3 more shows. And then we're going to call it, I don't want to say a season, it's not exactly a season show, but we're going to call it a break. We're going to come back in 2024. So we're going to take a couple months off. So we've got 3 more episodes where we're going to be capturing headlines and telling stories, potentially showing interviews. Going to have something special happen in episode 50. So set your calendars for that. And of course, we want to take this moment to thank you, everyone who engages with this show, whether you're watching us on Twitch, whether you watch us on YouTube, whether you see our clips in social media, whether that's in TikTok or in YouTube Shorts or in Twitter and Facebook or in Instagram Reels, any of the places that we post these things, we thank you. We appreciate anybody for joining us here on the live stream or watching us after the fact on YouTube. We do this show usually between 5:30 and 6:30 p.m. Pacific time on Twitch live, and then we ultimately process and edit and package and upload everything to YouTube, usually Tuesday or Wednesday the following week. We're just a little bit late on last week's episode. That'll be up soon. But thank you again for joining us. If you don't already, please follow us on Twitch. Subscribe to us on YouTube. We got tons more stuff coming, and not to mention, there is a whole volley of interviews from other members of the Mixdown team staff. I've seen some of them. It's some wonderful stuff. We got some really great content coming for you. So please follow us on Twitch, subscribe to us on YouTube. We got a lot more coming for you, and please join us again next week on Thursday at roughly 5:30 p.m. Pacific time for the next live stream. So thanks again for joining us. So glad to see you well.